this is the Abstract Reasoning Year 6 walkthrough. And Abstract Reasoning is one of the harder papers, as you have only 35 questions to do in 20 minutes, okay? So you need to be really good at identifying patterns, and that comes through a lot of practice, all right? At Everest, we try to focus on the two question types that show up in the exam, the sequence and the matrix, okay? And the sequence is basically what's next in the pattern. That's pretty easy and not usually that hard, all right? Sometimes they make it really difficult though. The more harder one though is the matrix. This one has a lot of pattern combinations that could be present. For example, we could have things that are in the columns, rows, and maybe there's some addition pattern going on. There's a lot going on that can be done for this question. So we recommend thoroughly practicing this, as you'll get exposed to a variety of questions, okay? And you'll be able to pick up patterns more easily. So, question 1. Question 1 is a matrix question. Usually when we approach these, we look at columns or rows first. When you look at the columns, you notice that this gray square here, okay, it's moving in what way? It moves 1 anti-clockwise each time down the column. So it moves 1 anti-clockwise. And if you look over here, it moves 1 anti-clockwise. So you can be assured that it's going to move 1 anti-clockwise in this column as well. And you can see it does. So if it moves 1 anti-clockwise each time, it should end up in the top square. Which one has it in the top square? C, B, and D. So A can be eliminated. Now, if you look at this overall, you'll notice there's something interesting going across the rows, okay? You'll see that each row, okay, the spotted one, the spotted square, stays in the same position. And even though you can't see it in the first row, okay, you can still see that it stays in the same position. Maybe it's just covered up, okay? So knowing that, we must know that this spotted one is actually covered up and stays in this left position, okay? Which answer has it in the left position? B and D, okay? So we can eliminate C. Then, if you looked a bit closer as well, you would have noticed that the lines, okay, the lined square stays in the same position as well. It's just being covered up. So, where should the line one be? The line square should be at the top. So, if you see an option where it's not at the top, it's going to be wrong, okay? And B doesn't have the line square at the top. So, B is wrong. And D is our answer, okay? Question 2. Question 2 is another matrix question, okay? And with this one, we basically have to look at both rows and columns again. And if you notice, the columns have a more visible pattern. And what do I mean by this? Is that you can easily see that this gray oval, it's moving what? 1 space anti-clockwise each time. And if you look at this middle column, okay, you'd see this time it moves 1 clockwise, okay? So you're going to know that it's either going to move 1 anti-clockwise or 1 clockwise down the column. Down the column, 1 anti-clockwise or clockwise. So let's look at this one. Starts off here, then it moves where? Does it move clockwise or anti-clockwise? It moves anti-clockwise. So it should end up on the far right. The gray oval should be on the far right. Which answer option has that? Only D. So with this one, it's quite easy, and you can eliminate all of those other options in one shot. So always try to look for something that could help eliminate multiple answers at once, okay? If not, you might have to break it down and process it a bit more, all right? Question 3. Question 3 is another matrix question, but you can notice it's a bit different because there's kind of like mini matrices in each box of this big matrix, all right? So the big matrix is over here, okay? And there's some smaller matrices inside, okay? So you might have one of those type of questions that come up in your GATE exam. So what we can do is try and look for any obvious rotations, movements, etc. So if you look over here, I immediately notice that this circle, it's moving. In what way? It moves one anti-clockwise, okay? And if you look here, there's another shape that's moving anti-clockwise in this column. You can see that the square, it's moving one anti-clockwise each time. So we know that if we look at each column, there's going to be one shape moving anti-clockwise. So let's look at this last column. Which shape is moving anti-clockwise? The cross star or the four-pointed star? Well, it's the four-pointed star, okay? It moves one anti-clockwise. So we know it's going to move anti-clockwise again and into the bottom left square. So which answer option has the four-pointed star in the bottom left square? C, okay? So you can immediately cross out the others, all right? So noticing those obvious patterns is essential to getting these questions done quickly. Question 4. When we look at question 4, it's a sequence question. This one's a little bit tricky, but not impossible. So let's look at it. What do you notice immediately? Some things are moving, some things are staying the same. What things are staying the same? So if we look at the heart, all right, I give it a little bit of a highlight. Let's track its position. It stays the same, okay, for these first two, I guess, phases. And then it moves clockwise 90 degrees. When does it move clockwise 90 degrees? When it's at the second position. So it moves clockwise 90 degrees. When it's going from 2 to 3, it does that. Now, look here, it stays the same from 3 to 4. But if you notice, every second position, right, this second position to 4, okay, that's when it starts to change, okay? So from going from 4 to 5, okay, 4 to 5, it should move 90 degrees. It should move 90 degrees clockwise. So the heart should be at the top, okay? Which answer options have that? C and B do. So we can eliminate A and D, okay? Now, let's look at the other shapes. Maybe let's look at the circle. If you look at the circle, let's track its position. It does something similar. The first two, it stays the same. Then it moves from 2 to 3. So it should also move from 4 to 5, okay? Because every second one, like we said earlier. So it's moving, how much is it moving? 90 degrees. So the circle should move 90 degrees such that it ends up over here, okay? Which one has that kind of option? C or B? C. So C is our answer, okay? And B is wrong. Question 5. So here, we'd notice that the shapes here are moving across. They're moving across from left to right across the string, okay? So let's look at the position of, let's say, the heart. The heart moves one across, so it ends up here. Then this heart over here moves one across, and it ends up there, okay? So these hearts are moving one space to the right. So they move one space to the right. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing you should also notice is that when you have a shape at the end, the far right, okay, it soon moves across and kind of disappears, okay? So when it's at the end, when it goes into the next shape, you can't see that anymore. There's only one circle. Before there was two. There were two. Now there's only one. So we can imagine that maybe this circle has disappeared and moved to a different area of space. Okay, we can't even see it anymore. All right. So that's what happens when a shape gets to the very end. Okay. So when it gets to the very end, in the next box, it will disappear. All right. So let's use that to help us find out what will be in the question mark. Okay. So what shape do we have at the end here? Well, we have a circle. Okay, we have a circle. So this circle in the next box, okay, the next box, let me draw the box here. The next box, it's not going to be shown. It's going to disappear. All right, so we only have one circle. But remember from earlier, all the shapes are moving one to the right. So this circle over here is going to end up in the middle, okay? So let's draw in the middle. And every other shape also moves one to the right. So the square ends up here. Sorry, it was like this, like a diamond looking shape. The square ends up like this. So we should have a pattern where it has a circle in the middle and the squares right next to it, okay? So which one has that? Not A, not C. B is close because it has a circle in the middle, but it doesn't have two squares next to each other. So B is wrong. So therefore, our answer is D because it has that layout. All right. Question 6. Well, question 6 involves looks kind of confusing in some ways, but what it has mainly, it has these colors, right? These different colors. So we have black, we have black, okay, black. Then we have some brick wall looking pattern. Then we have this dotted pattern. Then we have this line pattern. Then we have this gray pattern, okay? So let's follow C. So remember scans? We're going to follow C, color, okay? So let's follow color. It starts off where? Black starts off here, okay? Starts off at the top. Then where does it go in the next pattern? It moves down into this little section over here. Then after that, the black goes into the circle, this circle over here. And after that, black goes into the middle circle. So you can clearly see there's some pattern where it goes from this position here to this section, large area here. Then it moves into the circle. Then it moves into the middle circle. Then potentially it's going to move to the third circle, okay? Because logically, it's going from big area to small area, then to circle, 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 and then ends up back in those big portions of area, okay? So that's what's happening. It's following that pattern. So using that logic, where should the black color go now? It should move into this circle. So which one has black in the far right circle? C does, okay? So that's why C is our answer, okay? Question 7. So question 7 involves a couple of aspects. So here we can see that there's 4 shaded gray squares, okay? So we can label this as 4. Here there's 3. Here there's 2, okay? And this is involving using numbers, okay? We do use n in scans, okay? So look here, we have 1, 2, 3 squares, then 1, 2 squares, then we have 1 square. So what do you notice what is happening? What do you notice that's happening? So you see that it starts off with 4, then decreases by 1. Then we go to the next row, it starts off with 3 and decreases by 1. And if we follow the same pattern for the bottom row, we see that it starts off with 2, 2, okay? Then it goes to 1. Then what do you think it's going to be over here? Well, it's decreasing by 1, right? So minus 1 is going to be a 0. So it should be an answer with a 0 shaded squares. So A and C are automatically out. Remember to eliminate your answers, all right? So now we narrow it down to orientation, the arrangement of the middle X. Okay, this middle like cross, okay? So let's focus on that now. So over here, we have the cross like this, vertical. Then it moves into a weird X-looking shape, a diagonal shape, okay? So the lines go a bit more diagonal. So then it goes back into this vertical and horizontal position. We can see the same thing as we go down the column, okay? As we go down the column, we see it starts off with this regular cross, then it moves to an X shape, then it goes down to a cross, normal cross, okay? So we can see it alternates. It's basically alternating its position, okay? So alternating its position. So we see that it starts off like this, normal cross. Then it becomes that diagonal line cross, okay? Diagonal lines here. Then what do you think is going to happen here? It should become a vertical cross, right? Okay, so it should have a vertical orientation. So it's like this. Okay, so D is our answer. All right. Question 8. So in question 8, we have to look at a matrix here, like as usual, like similar to the previous question. And here we need to think about what letter from scans we can use. So I think arrangement A is one valid factor to look at. So if we look here, the position, arrangement is like position as well, right? So the position of the star starts off in the top left, then it moves to the top right. So it's top left to top right. Then it goes down to the bottom. Okay, it's moving in a very clockwise manner. All right, clockwise manner. So I wrote it down here, clockwise movement. Okay, so this clockwise movement is what's happening with not just the star, but also with the square. Because you can see it's moving down to this position, then it moves up to this position, the top left. So let's use this pattern and apply it to the last row, okay? So as we go across the row, all the items should be moving in a clockwise way. So let's look at the star. Star starts off in the top right, then it should become at the bottom. The star should be at the bottom, okay? So that's where it should be. Then, let's quickly draw it in first. Star. Then your square should end up where? At the top left, okay? So which options have that? So we have A, C, B, and D, and which one has star at the bottom? Well, A and C do. And A and C both have a square at the top left, as you can see right here, square at the top left and star at the bottom. So which options are automatically out? B and D, okay? You got to always follow this process of elimination. So now it comes down to this shaded bit, because that's the only difference between these two answers. And if you notice, the color, okay, the shaded bit, it only stays once in each row, okay, once in each row, once in each row. So because it already showed up once, we cannot have another shaded circle in this row, okay? So that means C has to be wrong. It's just not possible. So C is wrong and A is our answer, okay? So A is our answer. Question 9. So when you look at this one, you notice there's something odd going on here. There's some gray color in the background, sometimes black in the background, and we can't really understand it at first. So let's break it down step by step. First, the most obvious thing we can pick out from this is that the color is moving to the right, okay? So this black triangle, the color black, is moving over to here, as you can see in the previous next box. So it moves over to the right. Starts off in the first position, then it moves to the second position. Then it moves again to this position. Okay, that's where it ends up. So we notice that the colors move to the right, as I've written down here below. Okay, the colors move to the right. So noticing that, we can figure out some of the elements of this question mark box. Okay, so let's look here. The black heart is here. So where should the black heart end up? It should end up on the far right. Which ones have the black heart on the far right? A and B. So we can eliminate C and D. They're just not possible. Now we have to realize what is causing this weird background to change. Okay. If you notice, let's say looking at the first row, this gray color moves out into the background. It becomes the thing that surrounds every triangle. Then this white color moves out and becomes the white background surrounding these triangles. Okay, so this last triangle becomes the background. That's what we have to know. Okay, last triangle or last shape, in this case, last shape becomes the background. So what's the last color in this box here? It's gray. So gray should become the background. Okay, it should become the background. So which one has gray as a background, A or B? A. Okay, so A is our answer and B is wrong. Question 10. Question 10 was quite a tricky question. That's why I put an asterisk over here. Okay, because it's not too difficult in the sense you can't find, like, narrow down your options, but it's just choosing that last option. That's where it gets a bit difficult. So the first thing you need to notice straight away is the position, the arrangement of these gaps in these pentagons, okay? Because usually these will make pentagons, right? But there's a gap, so they're missing a line. And you notice that the gap moves clockwise 2 steps each time. So I'll show you what I mean. So we have the gap over here, right? Then it moves 1, 2. So the gap should end up over here. And guess what? It's over here. Then this gap moves 1, 2. Should end up over here now. And there's a gap over here. See? See how the gap moves 2 steps clockwise? So, knowing that, what's 2 steps clockwise from this position? Well, 1, 2. So the gap should be over here. Which one has the gap in that position? C and D have those, okay? So that eliminates A and B, sorry, immediately, okay? Now it's between C and D, and we have to look at the circles. One major problem many people might get into, and even I fell into this a little bit, is that you might get too obsessed with looking at what pattern these circles and these colored dots are making. At first, you might think, oh, it might be a bit simple, because look here. It forms like this kind of trapezoid, this little formation there, right? And then maybe it's just rotating these dots around. Maybe it's moving like that, okay? And then it rotates, and maybe it's going to end up, oh, wait, it doesn't end up like that. It ends up in a different position, okay? So arrangement doesn't really work. Now let's look at color maybe. Let's look at color. There's 2 dots here that are gray. Then somehow 3 come into the picture. Then there's 3 here. And then there's 3 over here. It just doesn't follow a logical connection. There's no logical connection in terms of those colored dots and the number of dots that are colored, okay? So, like where they are and how many there are, basically, okay? So we had to just look at another way. Another way of approaching it is to see, are there any similar shapes? Because my way of thinking about it is, are there any similar shapes in this pattern? For example, what I mean is there a pentagon that looks like this with the gap over here, and another one that has a similar outlook, a similar design, okay? And what I came to realize is that here, you notice this one, right? This one looks awfully like a symmetrical reflection of this, okay? And you can see when it's a symmetrical reflection, the dots are in the same position. So that means whatever the answer is, we know it's going to be a pentagon like this, okay? What's a symmetrical reflection going to be? It's going to be one that has the gap on the left side, right? That's a symmetrical reflection. So that's S, part of scans, okay? Symmetry. So which shape in the pattern we've been given so far has this kind of design? The first one, right? The first one has that design. So we know that the colored dots and the number of dots in the layout is going to be the same. So it should have the dots in this exact formation. Which answer has that? Answer C does. So that's why C is our answer and D is not. So it's very important to not fall into and obsess over a pattern where you can't really figure anything out from, okay? So you might have to think in a different way. Look for symmetry. Look for other aspects of scans, okay? Don't just narrow down and fixate on one aspect. Question 11. So here we can notice there's two parts to each square. It's split up clearly with a line. So let's look at each part individually, all right? So if we look at on this side, okay, on this side, we notice there's how many shaded hearts? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now let's see what happens as we move across. 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's 5, and there's 4 on this side. Then what? How many on the left for the third square? There's going to be 1, 2, 3. And you can see there's 2 over here, okay? So that means our answer, the question mark box, should have 1 on the left. So there should be 1 shaded on the left. So which answers have 1 heart shaded on the left? Not B and not C. So it's between A and D because they have that 1 shaded heart, okay? So now let's look at the part on the right individually. So here we notice there's 1, 2, 3. Then we notice there's 1, 2. Then we notice it goes down. It goes by the same pattern. It's decreasing by 1. So when we get to here, it's 0. However, what can we think the next box will have? Because you can't really go to -1 hearts, right? In terms of number of shaded hearts, yeah? So we have to use a bit of logic. If it's not going to go down, then maybe it's going to go back up. Maybe it'll go back up. That makes logical sense because it feels like it's going down, then it'll go back up, all right? So that means the part on the right should have 1 heart shaded in the next question mark box, okay? So which answer, A or D, has 1? It's D, okay? So A is wrong because you can't just suddenly get 2 hearts on the right, okay? So A is obviously wrong. And that's why D is your answer. Question 12. So this one is also quite a little bit tricky because it tries to distract you in some ways. And I'll show you what I mean. So if you notice here, these clovered leaf shapes, okay, they sometimes look like they're coming together here in this first pattern, yeah? But then for some reason, it just starts to separate. Okay, they start to separate. You can see how they're really close here. They literally overlap. But now they're starting to separate. But then they suddenly come back and start to meet up again. And then even more, over here, they just join together and form another flower-looking shape. So if you just look at that by itself, it becomes very confusing, okay? So it kind of creates a distraction. So let's look at and focus at another element of scans. So let's look at color, because you can see there's a shaded shape over here, okay? So let's see. When we look at here, this vertically orientated clover, like this shape, okay, we notice that the top is shaded. Okay, the top is shaded. Then you can see, okay, it moves to the left. So the left becomes shaded. Okay. So the left becomes shaded. And then you notice when you extract it out, extract means to take out. So you take out the shape that looks like that. When you take it out, what's shaded over here? The bottom, okay? So what do you notice is happening with the shaded bits? The shaded leaf is rotating, okay? That's what's happening. It's rotating. In this case, it's rotating anti-clockwise. So, where is the shaded position for the clover leaf that looks like this, okay? Can we outline that? So we can outline it here. Looks like that. And where is it now? It's on the far right, which matches our description because it should be rotating anti-clockwise. So where should it end up in the next image? It should end up at the top, right? At the top. So which one has that at the top, shaded, okay? If you look here, you can notice that the top is shaded over here. So this is possible. Is this one possible? No, because it kind of doesn't even show any shading for this, okay? So B is not possible. How about D? Well, D doesn't show anything at the top either. See, notice it's on the left. So D cannot be our answer. So it's between A and C because they both have it at the top, okay? Now let's look at the other clovered leaf shape, okay? So if you look here, I'm going to do it in blue. This is the first one, okay? And it looks like, it's on the bottom right. Now let's do it over here. Let's see what happens over here. It comes to the bottom left. So it goes like this. So now you can see it's kind of moving in a clockwise direction, all right? It's moving in a clockwise direction because over here it ends up on the top left. So obviously it's moving in a clockwise direction, all right? So over here, it starts off on the top right. So to move in a clockwise direction, I'll rub this out to make it more clear. So this is what we're looking at. If we're looking at this, right, it's shaded on the top right. If it moves clockwise, it should end up over here, right? Which shape has that shaded in the bottom right? We can see A has that because look, when you draw it out, trace it, you see it's in the bottom right. This shaded bit's in the bottom right. So A is our answer, okay? And C cannot be right, okay? So that's where to know the trick, not to delve into certain patterns too much, okay? Because you might get confused and they might not be even necessary. They could be distractions, all right? Question 13. So with question 13, it's a bit interesting because sometimes, usually we will focus on each box of this matrix and see, oh, what's happening here? How is it related to each one? Okay. But in this question, there's no clear association or relationship between these different shapes. Okay. So there's something weird going on. So if there's no real clear link, like we can't see any triangles here, they just disappear and this triangle's not there either. Maybe to look at columns or rows, okay? So let's say we look at rows. How many triangles are there in each row? There's 1, 2 in this first one. In the second row, there's 1, 2. In the third row, we need to figure out what that question mark is, so we can't say for sure. But what we know so far, it says 2 triangles in each row. So that's a tick there. Now let's look at the trapeziums. How many trapeziums are there in each row? 3. Okay, there's 3 trapeziums. Okay, and circles 1, 2, 3, 4 in each row. 1, 2, 3, 4 in each row. So we have to make sure that this third row satisfies that rule. Are there 2 triangles already in this third row? Not really. So we have to know there's going to be a triangle in here. Okay. Then are there 3 trapeziums? No, there's only 2 over here. So there should be another trapezium over here. Okay? And what about circles? Well, circles there's only 3. So it should be 1 circle here as well. Okay, there's only 3 circles outside of that square. So there should be a triangle, a circle, and a trapezium. Which answer has that? C. C is the only one that has that. So straight away you can eliminate everything else. Okay, and C is our answer because of that. Question 14. Question 14 involves movement, okay? Similar to our other previous questions, okay? So here, we notice that there's two dots here, and each one moves one clockwise, okay? So they move one clockwise and end up in these two positions as shown below, okay? So the first thing we should know is it moves one clockwise. What else is happening, okay? Is anything else happening for these two boxes? Not really. It's just each one moving one clockwise. And you can tell this one moving one clockwise will end up here, which is what happens in the second box. And this one, okay, this square moves one clockwise, so it should end up here, which is what happens over here. Okay, so we can confirm that. And we can also check this one, and it works the same way. So step 2 is, though, from this box to this box, okay? What's happening here? Do we see that one clockwise movement happening again? Not really, because if it moved one clockwise, right, it should end up here, which does happen. But this circle, this oval, sorry, should move one to the right and end up in this position. But it doesn't. It's actually just a white oval. So something different is happening here. So maybe it's moving by a greater amount because it maybe doesn't have to be always fixed, okay? So don't just assume that it's always going to move one clockwise to the right every single time. Maybe it changes the amount it moves. So let's assume that. Let's think about that. So let's say we move this 1, 2. So it should end up over here, which happens here. So good. What about this? 1, 2. It ends up over here, which is what we want. Good. So we can confirm that it moves 2 steps clockwise for that second movement. All right. So using that knowledge, let's focus on our third row. So we have 1 here and it moved 1, so it ends up here. Okay, so we know it's moving 1 clockwise from here to here. Okay, but let's focus on this box to this box. What happens? We're focusing on the 2 steps clockwise. Okay, so this is going to move 2 steps clockwise, so it should end up here. So let's draw that in. So 2 steps clockwise, so here. Okay, that's shaded. Now this moves 2 steps clockwise. Okay, so 1, 2. So there should be 1 shaded over here. Now, this moves 2. 1, 2. So it should end up over here. Okay, so this should be shaded. And finally, the last one, okay, the last one was this one. This one moves 1, 2. So there should be 1 oval shaded over here. Okay, so this is what the pattern should end up being. Something like that. So which answer has that? D. Okay, so that makes everything else wrong, and D is our answer. All right. Question 15. Question 15, like I've stated over here, involves a bit of subtraction, okay? And I'll explain what that means. So, if you look in the first row, what stays the same throughout? Both these lines, okay? So they form the cross. But why does the triangle disappear? Why does that have to disappear? Well, that could be because if one shape, sorry, is in the same position in these two boxes, okay, then they'll be eliminated or subtracted, okay? That's what I'm trying to picture, okay? So let's produce this pattern and see if it works in the second row. So here we see that this line is in the same position as this line. So based on our rule, it should disappear in this box. And yes, it's missing. It should have been here. So that means If you have a shape in the same position in two boxes like here, right here, they'll be eliminated, okay? And the rest will just be put on top of each other, like shown here. This line here is added together with this line and becomes a cross, okay? So let's look at the bottom row. As you can see, what remains after everything we do with these two boxes? Only the triangle. So that means the triangle does not repeat over here. Because if it did repeat over here, it will be subtracted because they're in the same position. Okay? So that means everything else, these lines, this triangle, should be over here. Okay? It should be like this exactly. Why? Because now they're all in the same positions, right? So we can subtract them away. And what happens when you subtract all of this away? We just end up with the triangle as shown here, okay? So we should have something that looks like this, like a double cross here and with a triangle on the top right. So which one has that? B, okay? So B is our answer, and A and C and D are wrong, okay? So here the tip is to focus on rows and columns, or mainly rows in this case, and see what's changing, okay? Because you notice straight away something is removed, and that should give you a hint that there's some additional or some sort of alterations happening, okay? Question 16. With question 16, we need to look at color and the position of these colors, okay? Similar to some of the ones we've done today. So, if we look here, this gray color moves up and it comes here. And this white color moves up and comes over here. So that shows the colors are moving in this top from bottom right to top left direction, okay? But the second thing you should also notice is that when the color gets up to here, the black bit over here, which is the very top square, it's removed entirely from the pattern in the next part of the sequence. So whenever color is over here, in the next part of the sequence, it's removed. But then it comes back at the bottom in the next following part of the sequence, okay? So that means when we look over here, this dotted pattern should not show up in the next part, okay? So if any one of these has a dotted section, okay? So C has a dotted section and B have a dotted section. So C and B are both wrong, okay? If they have it, they're wrong. Now, we should also notice that this black color over here is going to move up and it's going to take up this portion of the circle. So we should have black over here. This is only white. This is only white. So A is wrong, okay? A is wrong. So that leaves us with D, okay? And that's why D is our answer. Question 17. Question 17 is a slightly tricky one. Here, you had to look for both color and the shape and the arrangement of the shapes, okay? So first of all, let's look at the arrangement of the shapes. See, we have like a rectangle, a pentagon, and a hexagon, okay? Now let's see how they move in the process of the sequence, okay? So let's see. The pentagon moves one to the right, so it ends up on the far right, okay? And you also notice that the square also moves one to the right and ends up in the middle, okay? So what's happening is it's just moving one step to the right, okay? All these shapes. However, when it gets to the end, like over here with the pentagon, it moves away and disappears and doesn't show up in the next sequence, part of the sequence, okay? So, using the logic, where would this hexagon end up? It would end up on the far right. So it should look like something like this, okay? And you have like your pentagon in the middle because this is how these two will move, okay? So your pentagon should be in the middle and the hexagon should be on the right. Which ones don't have that as your answer? Well, this B doesn't have a pentagon or a hexagon on the right side, so B is wrong. And D is wrong as well. So it's between A or C. Next, the final part was quite difficult to grasp for some people. So here we had to just recognize what could be the order of colors, like how are the colors changing? Well, I realized something, that each first color here, the black one, becomes the last color in the pattern, okay, in the next pattern, okay, the next part of the pattern. And then what happens? This part over here, okay, becomes the first two colors of the alternating pattern, okay? So it's like the one after when you skip a pattern, okay? When you skip a part of the pattern. So let's look at this, all right? Here, using that same knowledge, we have a gray triangle and a dotted rectangle. So this will become the first two colors, okay, of the question marks box, okay, that the where the our final figure is going to be. So the first two shapes should have a shaded gray and a dotted pattern respectively. So C is our answer because it has a shaded gray rectangle and a dotted pentagon. So C is our answer, okay? So you have to notice that alternating pattern with these changing colors, okay? Question 18. So here it's involving these three-quarter circles. So initially it shades half a three-quarter circle, one three-quarter circle, and then the second three-quarter circle in that row is shaded. But what else do you notice happens? Is this the same as that? No, it's not. It's been rotated 90 degrees clockwise. Okay, 90 degrees clockwise. So after a shape has been shaded, in the next part of the pattern, it rotates 90 degrees clockwise, okay, like shown here. So that's what's happening. And then after this, it turns back to being white, as you can see here. It goes back to its original white state. So if we follow the chain, we see that we get to this final three-quarter circle being shaded and being rotated, okay? So it's been rotated already, all right? That's why it's in that position. So because it's been rotated, that means in the next part of the pattern, this should return back to its white three-quarter circle that looks like that, okay? So it should look like this in the next pattern. Which answer has that? Well, all of them do, okay? So we can't just base our answer off of that alone. So how about we look at some other factors? Okay, if we know each subsequent three-quarter circle is going to be shaded, okay, which circle will be shaded after this one? Because there's no other three-quarter circles after this, right? Logically, that should make us think it'll go back to the start, because most of the time, there may be situations where you can't really move on to the next shape. So usually think about going back to the start, like restarting the pattern. So potentially this is going to be shaded now, okay? Because when it moves back, this will become shaded. So your pattern will have on the top row a shaded three-quarter circle with two more unshaded in their normal positions, okay? So which one has that? Both B and D kind of have it. So we have A is wrong and C is wrong. But notice with D, this middle one is not in its resting position. The resting position I'm referring to is this, okay? It's being rotated. Rotation only occurs after being shaded. So this means D is wrong, absolutely wrong. So B is our answer, okay? We didn't even have to look at the gray bit. Question 19. Straight away with question 19, you notice it's not similar to the previous types of questions we've encountered. We can see there are some dashed lines over here across the entire box, and then there's some solid lines. And you should be able to recognize that it kind of looks like a maze. All right? That's the first thing that should help you. It looks like a maze. And usually when you're doing a maze, you start at the entrance here. So this will be our first shape. This is our first. This will be our second. This will be our third. This will be our fourth. And this will be our fifth. Okay? So let's kind of figure out what the pattern could be. Because we know this is going in this direction, let's figure out how the color changes perhaps. So look over here. You can see this white portion here is pointing towards the top left like this. But then over here, it faces this way. So what happened? It went from facing this way to this way. That's a 90-degree turn, okay? 90-degree turn. Because that's literally 90 degrees there, okay? Then, what does it end up doing? It moves, not 90 degrees anymore, it moves in a different way. So, we can't use 90 degrees as our base unit for measurement, okay? Because if you notice, the star can't be split up into equal 90-degree portions. So, we could just base it on how many turns it makes. So, let me explain what I mean. If you start here, one turn would be like making the white portion go here, because it starts off facing this way and then it goes to this second portion of the star. Then when it gets over here, if it moves over here, that's one portion, one move, one turn. So then if it moves over here, that's going to be two turns because it moved 1, 2. All right? And that's what you have over here. You moved 2 turns from here. So if it moved 1 turn for the first step, so move 1 turn for the first step, then over here I move 2, then what do you think the next one's going to be? 3, and we can test it out. It moves 1, 2, 3. So the white portion should be over here. Okay, and that's what happens over here. Okay, so 3. So the increase in the number of turns is changing. Okay, it's changing from 1 to 2 to 3, then most likely to 4 as well, then to 5. Okay, so the next one, let's see what that's going to be. So a question mark box should be the result of turning this white bit, okay, this white bit 6 times. All right, so let's figure that out. So 1 turn will be facing this way, 2 turn will be facing this way, 3 turn will be facing this way, 4 turns will be facing that way, 5 turns will be facing this way, and 6 turns is facing this way, which is the original position. So we should see a star in the original position. So which ones have that? Well, A and C both have that, okay? Because they have that facing bottom right, okay? B and D don't. Okay, now we figured out one part. Can we figure out the other part? Because now we know it moved 6. So then, where would it be pointing? It should be pointing, the next star should be pointing towards here. Because remember I did a full rotation? So the 7th position, 7th move, turn, should be making it face this way, which both A and C have. Okay? So how do we decide which one, A or C, is correct? Well, we have to look at the gaps between each star, okay? So let's remove what I've written over here. How many squares does it take to get to the next star in this maze? Okay, it moves 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, 7 gaps in between. Then there's how many gaps in between here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then how many gaps between the next one? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you see that's decreasing by 1. So 1, do a different color. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then it's going to be 1, 2, 3. Then it's going to be 1, 2. So it should be on the top right. Okay, a star should be on the top right, the first star. Then it moves. It should have a 1 gap. Okay, So it should be over here. There should be a star over here. So which one has this, A or C? A, because A has a diagonal look that we wanted, all right? So A is our answer, okay? Question 20. Question 20 involves our normal matrices. So basically, we have to look at either columns or rows or different portions, different squares, how they relate to each other. Here, I think looking at rows is better because, look here, you can easily see there is some change from each shape in each row, okay? This black arm, right? This black arm moves anti-clockwise 1. Then it moves anti-clockwise 1, all right? And then it does the same thing over here, okay? It starts off here, then it moves 1 anti-clockwise, okay? That's how it ends up there. So using that same logic, we can figure out the movement, okay? But if you notice, over here, it's moving in a clockwise position. So it's kind of doing the opposite now, all right? Let's follow this trend. So it starts off here, then it moves clockwise. So it should end up facing the right. The right arm should be facing the right, okay? The shaded arm. So which one has a shaded arm facing the right? C and B, okay? So that means A and D are wrong. All right, now let's look at the checkered section, okay, the checkered arm. So this checkered arm in the first row moves anti-clockwise, okay? Which ends up over here, all right? It does the same thing in the, okay, actually here it does a bit different. It moves clockwise, okay? Then it moves clockwise, so that's why it ends up like that. So you just have to follow the trend of the row, okay? Each row is a bit different, okay? So let's look at this one. Where does it move to this? It moves anti-clockwise, okay? Anti-clockwise. So where should it end up? It should end up facing the left arm. It should be in the left arm. So checkered one should be on the left. So which one's that? Only B, okay? C doesn't have it on the left. So B is our answer, okay? And C is wrong. 21. So 21 is a matrix question again, but looks a bit odd, but you should be able to recognize that these are kind of like parts of the whole parts of this like like thing that's being formed, okay? So it's a decision you have to make. Should I look at the columns or the rows? Okay. So if I look at the rows, I don't really see any common like parts, okay? Or some really similar things. So here we can see there's an arm here that's pointing towards the left and towards the bottom, but really doesn't really link together, okay? So maybe it's not about having the similar shapes and there's like some sort of change going on. Maybe it's that together they operate, okay? They work together, okay? Like that question where we had to look at the full row together. And I think these kind of bits add together to form a full cross, okay? A full cross with these circles on the outside, okay? That's what's happening here. So when we add up this row, we get this shape, okay? If you can visualize it, yeah? And this works in the same way for the column. The columns also do the same thing. Let's take one, for example. Let's take the second column. We have this portion over here with a circle on the bottom. Then we have this top circle here in this shape and this side arm and the bottom arm. Then we have this top arm with the rest of the two circles, okay? So obviously when you add them all up, it makes this common shape, okay? So we have to look at this column, I suppose, or a row, it's up to you. I'm going to choose a column, and we need to find out what's going to happen when we add up all these. Like how does this make that shape, this cross shape, okay? So let's put together what we have. So we have this top bit and this circle. Then we also have these two circles from here. Okay, I'll make it a bit more clear. I'll do it in a different color so you guys get it. So we have these two circles here. okay? So what part has to go here so that it completes the shape? Well, it's this. So we should see a answer where it just has this rectangle with a circle next to it, okay? This incomplete rectangle. So I think B is the only one that satisfies that answer, okay? So everything else is wrong. All right. 22. So this is normal sequence pattern. So here we have a circle and it's moving across in an anti-clockwise direction. Anti-clockwise direction. All right. So it's moving anti-clockwise. So what does that mean overall in terms of how far it moves? Okay. So let's see. It moves once, okay? But then it doesn't move once again, it moves twice. So it's similar to that previous question again. It's changing the number of steps it takes, okay? So from here, it has to move 3 because here it moved 1, then it moved 2. So now it has to move 3. So let's move 3 from this position. 1, 2, 3. So it should end up here. And yes, it is, okay? So for the answer, then we have to move 4. Okay, we have to move 4. So let's work that out. 1, 2, 3, 4. So our circle should end up over here. Okay, which ones have that? A and C. A and B, sorry. So C and D are wrong. Okay. Now to look on the about you have to look about look at the to look for the color. Okay. So let's look at the color. Okay. So let's see. We have the grid shape here. And then the grid shape disappears and the shaded gray bit goes inside. Okay, the shaded gray bit goes inside. Then after that, the lines, the vertical lines go inside. All right, so the vertical lines go inside. So the outside background pattern goes inside into the star. So let's look over here. This zigzag pattern would go inside into the star. Which one has that? A zigzag pattern. A, because it has a zigzag here. Okay, so A is our correct answer and B is wrong. Okay. 23. 23 can get a couple of people because of the way the circles are moving in relation to the background, okay? So let's look at just this the colored rectangles, okay? So here we notice this black and gray component, okay, this black and gray design repeats over here, okay? So it goes from black and gray to white and black, then to gray and white, and then back again to restart the pattern. So what should the next one be? Logically, it should be white and black because it's restarting again. Okay, remember that thing I told you earlier about restarting? So that's what has to happen. Okay, so you restart the pattern. So it goes back to a white and black layout. Which one has a white and black layout? C and D. So A and B are wrong. Okay, now let's focus on the individual circles. Okay, so we know that this gray circle is here, okay? This is what comes out to me as weird because where is this gray circle over here? It just disappeared. But if you notice, this rectangle here has a little bit of gray around it. So if the circle is the same color as a rectangle, won't it just become invisible because it's the same color, right? So now, because the background's changed, you can see the gray now, okay? So I'm telling you now, the gray one was here first, and then it moved over here, okay? And then look here, it's supported again, this pattern, because it moves down once again, all right? So we can correctly assume that this was originally the gray circle, okay? We just can't see it because it's in the background of a gray rectangle, okay? So it's covered by the gray rectangle. So knowing that, where should the gray one end up? Okay, so now we have the gray one over here. Where should it end up now? It should move one up. So it should end up on the left side, okay, in the middle. So which one has that? C, okay? So C is our correct answer, all right? And D is wrong, all right? Simple. Question 24. So I think the best way to look at it is to look at the gap and how the gap changes because we don't know how the gap is moving really, okay? And it affects how our pattern will look like, okay? So let's look at the gap first. This gap moves where? It moves 1, 2 to here, okay? Then it moves 1, 2 to here, okay? As you can see, there's a link here. Now, where should it go? It should move 1, 2, and ends up over here. So now where should it end up for our question mark? It should end up 1, 2 at the top. So there should be a gap at the top. So which one has a gap at the top? D does. So D is our answer. All right. So D is our answer for 24. 25. 25 is an interesting one because it doesn't follow traditional ways of approaching these questions, okay? But it's still an important one to know, okay? So you should take this down. Sometimes patterns will involve mixing colors. So mixing colors, okay? Because if you think about it, what is gray? Gray is a mix of black and white, technically, okay? So when you mix black with white, it gets you gray. So let's look at this pattern. Let's look at the rows because the rows help us connect the gray bits with the black circles, okay? So when we look over here, which circles end up being gray, okay? Let's look at, so we have this one, this one, this one. So let's look at it. I'll just use a different color because it's a bit difficult to see. That, and that, and that, okay? So basically all these shaded ones end up being gray. And what do you notice about these? These are the positions where we have, first of all, a black, okay, and a white together in the same spot, okay? So you notice there's a black over here, and there's a white over here in the same spot. Black and white gets you gray, okay? That's why it gives you this position over here. And look at the other ones, okay? All of these are white, and all of these are black, okay? So white plus black gives you gray. So this is why this section is gray. Everything else, when you look at it, okay, this part here is just white, white. This part here is just white, white. White and white just give you nothing. So we don't get anything over here. So remember, it's just the black and the white places where they have both black and white in the same locations. Okay, see like there's black over here and there's white over here. Using that same understanding, let's go to the last row. All right, so the last row, which sections have both a black and a white? Okay, so let's just mark it out. So red. So now use a red marker. So we have black all across through here, but where is there a white? So there's a white over here, and there's a black over here. So that circle is going to be gray, okay? Where else do we have something similar? Okay, we have black over here, and white over here, and black over here, okay? So these are opposite colors, all right? They're all opposite. So that means this entire bottom row is going to be gray, okay? And is there anything else? Not really, because this is black and that's black. The others are just the same. They're not opposite colors. So we should have an option where it looks like this, and that is A. Okay? So that's a good concept to recognize and maybe think of when you do other questions. It might come up. Mixing colors, okay? When you have to combine colors together to produce another color, all right? It might not always be the same. Question 26. 26 uses elements of what we've talked about before. All right, look, talks about different things we've talked about before. So here, you can automatically realize that because the background is white, yeah, we have a triangle that's missing, okay? Because then that has to mean that this triangle is also white, right? Because like I said earlier for one of the previous questions, if we have a background that's white and the shape is white, the shape will seem invisible, okay? So there's actually a white triangle here. That's the point I'm trying to make. So now, look what happens. The white triangle moves one up, okay? Then it moves one up again. That's why it ends up here. And what do you also notice here? The background is also changing, and it depends on this outer triangle, this triangle at the end of the pattern. So here, this dotted triangle moves out and becomes the background. Here, the black triangle moves out and becomes the background, okay? So that's what's happening here. Now let's look at the row we are most interested in. Here, we have a triangle, okay? This triangle is going to be dotted, all right? Because there's a dotted background and we can't see anything. There should be 4 triangles at all time, okay? Because every example shows us that, okay? So there's 4 triangles at one time. So this is a dotted triangle, okay? Now, look what happens. Because this is dotted as well, the background doesn't change, all right? Because the outer triangle, this triangle at the end of the pattern will become the background, okay? This is a dotted triangle, so it becomes the background. Now, what's going to become the background for the question mark? Well, black is, because black is at that position, so black is going to be the background. Which ones have black as the background? A and C, okay? A and C have it. So, you can cross out B and D. Now, let's look at our other options. We have a spotted triangle at the bottom here. So what's going to happen to this one? It's going to move up. So it should end up over here, a spotted triangle, okay? The third triangle from the bottom. First triangle from the bottom, okay? So here, should be in this position. So where's a dotted triangle in the third position? Which one has that? Both A and C have it. So maybe let's look at the second triangle, because that seems to be the biggest difference, the second triangle, okay? We notice here that this triangle, okay, this triangle over here is going to move 1 up. So the second triangle here is going to be white. It should be white. So which one has that, A or C? A does. So A is our answer, all right? Question 27. So 27, to look at either columns or rows, okay? So let's look at rows because we can easily see there's some sort of movement pattern. So over here, we see the black, okay, the black dot moves 1, 2 spots to the right. Then moves 1, 2 spots to the right. And look at the gray. The gray moves 1, 2 spots to the right. Okay, so they're all moving 2 spots to the right. And we can check this pattern again with the other row. Here we have the dot and it moves 1, 2 to the right, then 1, 2 to the right, as shown there. So they're all moving 2 to the right. Okay, that's what we can conclude. All right. Now, using that logic, let's see what we can do to get our answer, okay? Because that's how we can apply the same, we're going to apply the same pattern, okay? So look here, we have the black dot, it moves 1, 2, and ends up here. So where was it beforehand, okay? It should have been here, because for that to get there, it has to move 1, 2, okay? Look at that, 1, 2. Okay, the black dot had to be there. So the black dot has to be in this position. Which one has that? I think D has that position, okay? D seems like the only one with that. So you can automatically choose D, all right? So that's why D is our answer. But just to make sure, okay, in the actual abstract reasoning test, you would want to just lock in D and come back and check after. But because we have time, I'm just going to show you how to do it. So just to double check, okay? So let's look at the gray dot, gray circle. So if you see here, it's moved 1, 2 in the clockwise direction, right? So beforehand, where should it have been? Well, let's move 2 back. 1, 2 back. So it should have been over here. So our answer should have the gray dot in that position, which it does, okay? So that's why it's correct, okay? But remember, when you're doing the test, you won't have time. So you have to immediately lock in your answer if it eliminates all the other 3 options, okay? And then come back and then double check, okay? Question 28, okay? Well, question 28 has a dead giveaway in terms of how to approach it. So if you look over here, there's a line they give. Why would they put the line there? Usually the line means as a partition, okay? So it kind of divides the pattern into 2. So let's focus on the left half. What's happening on the left halves, okay? So let's just look at 2 one pair. So here we notice that the black dots move one to the right. That's why this black dot moves one to the right and ends up at the edge. This black dot moves one to the right and ends up next to the edge, okay? And you can also see how this white one moves one across as well, okay? That's where it ends up. So we can notice everything is moving in this direction for this half at least, all right? So using that logic, let's see where this black dot would end up. It would end up here, and this black dot would end up here. So our pattern must have two black dots in the middle, okay? So this could be anything, okay? Two black dots in the middle. So which ones have that? C and B, because C and B, all right, if you look carefully, they have two black dots in the middle of that half, okay? The others do not have that. They do not have that. So we can cross them out. Now let's look at the other components, okay? We can look at perhaps the gray circle on that half, okay? We might not even have to look at the other half today. So let's look at the let's look at the gray dot, sorry. This gray dot moves one across. So the gray dot should end up on the edge. So which one has it on the edge? B or C? B. So B is our answer, okay? So try and eliminate making it too hard for yourself, okay? Because if you find the pattern of one half and clearly you can use it to find the single answer, then don't try and look at the other half and find the pattern of that half, okay? If you figured out that this pattern applies and helps you solve the answer find the answer immediately, don't waste time in terms of trying to find the other pattern for the other half, okay? And that applies for other questions as well, okay? Try and find the easiest way that can help you eliminate all your answers and give you the correct one, okay? Question 29. Okay, 29 involves a very important concept. It's called alternating patterns, so alternating sequence, okay? So what that means is, basically, this part only links with the next part after a skip, okay? So we just skip one, and that's the next part of our pattern. So this is 1, 2, and the question mark will be our 3. So we have to focus only on these highlighted bits, okay? So let's figure this out, the pattern, all right? So if you look here, this first one, you notice that there's 2 dots on these 2 sides, and they kind of have like a little line here. If you can think about drawing a little line here to show where it is, where these 2 dots will lie. They will be on either side of this line, okay? So now, where does it end up here? It ends up over here. How many steps did this line, this vertical line I drew, move? It moved 1, 2, because it has to end up over here, right? So it moved 1, 2. Okay, so it ends up over there. Okay, cool. So that means the dots will be on either side of this line, and the third dot will be opposite the line. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. This should be opposite. Now, what is going to happen for 3? Okay, so for 3, this line I drew over here, let me use a different color because it gets a bit confusing. Let's use blue. This line I drew here is going to move 2 this way. So it should end up over here. So my 2 circles on either side should be like this. Which ones have that kind of layout? Which answers have that kind of layout? B and D, okay? And A and C are obviously wrong. But you can automatically, without even thinking, cross out D because it has its third dot on the outside. It should be on the inside because all the time we have 3 dots on the inside for that alternating pattern. We have 3 dots on the inside here, 3 dots on the inside here, okay? So therefore D is wrong and B is our answer, okay? So like I said earlier, try and make it easy for yourself and immediately recognize things that are off, okay? So like that. That was a clear sign that B should be our answer. We don't have to overthink it. Question 30. Question 30 can straight away realize that the shapes are moving in a anti-clockwise direction. Anti-clockwise direction. So this smiley face over here is moving this way, okay? And it ends up over here, okay? Kind of self-explanatory, and it moves over here. But what's a bit different when it moves here? It flips, okay? It flips along the horizontal plane, okay? That's what it means, flipping along the horizontal plane, okay? So it ends up looking at that. So if you look at the other shapes, when they get to this particular position, when they get to that bottom left position, you realize they also flip. So this triangle over here is over here, and then when it moves down to this position, it flips, okay, along that horizontal plane. So now we can use this information to help find the answer, all right? So now we have the star. The star is right over here. It's about to move into this flipping zone. We'll call it the flipping zone, okay? The flipping zone. So what's going to happen when it gets there? It's going to flip. So how will it look like when it flips? How will the star look like when it flips? We'll have the pointy bit at the bottom, then two more pointy bits here. Should look like that. Should look like that. Okay, so your main pointy bit's pointing down. So let's look for an answer like that. Both A and B have that, so we can eliminate C and D. Okay. What else happens? Well, the triangle just moves to the right. Okay, the triangle should be now in this position. Which one has that? A or B? B, because B has hit the triangle in that position. Okay, they've incorrectly swapped around the shapes here. Okay, it should be in this order. So B is our answer. Okay. Question 31. Here, you might think it's one of those questions where you mix the colors, or maybe it's something with how each shape changes across. I think it's more similar to the second one I just mentioned, how each shape moves across, okay? But not exactly. It's not exactly about how it changes. It's more about how everything fits into a single piece. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So here, do we notice when you look at the first row of this first row is that this smiley face takes the top left position, this smiley face takes the middle, and this one takes the right. So you can see when you look at each row, each box shows each possible way the smiley face can be placed in that row. If that still doesn't make sense, I'll put it in more simpler terms. Basically, in the top row at least, for this shape, you can either have the smiley face on the left, the middle, or the right, okay? And basically, each box is showing each possible way, and each row should have show all the ways, okay? So look here, we have one on the left, one in the middle, and one on the right. So that completes that row, okay? Now let's look at the second row. See here, we have a smiley face shaded on the right, smiley face shaded on the left, and finally a smiley face shaded in the middle. So that completes that row, okay? Because we have everything in all the shaded parts have been in every possible position, okay? Now let's look at the bottom part, okay? So here we have the smiley face in the middle, smiley face on the right, and on the left. So it's been in all possible places. So now that's complete, okay? So now let's look at the bottom row, all right? And use that same logic. So we've had the smiley face in the middle for this top section. I'll make it more clear by dividing it into sections. So we have the smiley face in the middle, smiley face on the right. Where has it not been? It hasn't been on the left. So the smiley face must be on the left. What about this one in the middle? The shaded smiley face has been on the left. Then it's been in the middle, but hasn't been on the right. It hasn't been on the right. It has to be here, okay? So we'll draw one here, and it should be shaded, okay? Then, for the final mini row, we have a smiley face shaded on the right, smiley face shaded on the left, but we haven't had it in the middle. So we should have a row of three smiley faces with the middle one shaded. Which answer looks like that? I think C does, right? Because it has that exact same configuration. So A, B, and D are all automatically wrong, all right? Question 32, okay? Question 32 involves a similar concept, but not in the same way, okay? Remember that thing I told you about where it had the invisible shape? Well, here we're going to use it in a way to help us visualize something, okay? Because you can see when you go through the row, the groups of triangles changes. Here it's 1 and 4, here it's 3 and 2, and here it's just 5 by itself, okay? What's always changing is that this gap is changing, okay? So I'd like to show the gap with an invisible triangle, okay? This is what I would do, okay? Invisible triangle. How many triangles does it move? It moves 1, 2, okay? So it ends up in the 4th position. Then it moves 1, 2 again, and it ends up in the last position, okay? So that's what's happening. Then, where does it move? For the last row, okay? Because that's going to be applied here. It starts off here, then moves 1, 2. So it should end up in the second, as shown here. Then it moves 1, 2. So it should end up in the 4th position, okay? Which one has that? B and D do, okay? It's in the 4th position, okay? So B and D could be our potential answers. So automatically A and C are wrong. Now, let's look at the black triangle and see what pattern it has. Let's look at the second row this time. The black triangle moves 1, 2 positions, okay? That's where it ends up being. Then it moves 1, 2 positions, so it should end up right here, okay? Then it moves 1, 2, okay? So we can see it's moving 2 to the right each time. So let's look at this now. It's right now here, so it moves 1, 2. So it should end up in the 2nd position, okay? 2nd position. There should be a 3rd one there, okay? So which one has the black in the 2nd position, B or D? Well, it's actually B, because it's right here in the 2nd position. So B is our answer, and D is wrong, okay? Question 33. Okay, looking at it directly, you realize there's a pattern in the rows direction, okay? So this comes through experience determining whether to look at columns or rows, okay? And usually it involves examining each one individually and seeing if there's any relationships. Clearly, there's no real relationships between the parts in a column, okay? Because look here, the square just moves somehow to the other side, and then it moves back up, okay? So let's look at rows, okay? So let's look at rows. Let's look at the first one. Okay. What do we notice? So the arrow moves 1 up, ends up here. Okay. Then the square moves 1 to the side, ends up there. And then this pentagon, even though it's at the corner, doesn't move down. No, it actually moves into the center. And you notice that happens quite often with all the shapes. Whatever shape is in this corner moves into the center in the next part of the pattern. All right, so it starts up there and it moves into the center. So let's look at our row here. So which one's going to go in the center? This arrow, right? So the arrow is going to be in the center. This arrow is going to be in the center. So which one has the arrow in the center? D and C. So we can eliminate A and B, okay? So A and B are wrong. Now, let's look at the position of another shape. Let's look at the smiley face, let's say. So the smiley face is here, moves 1 up here, okay? Then it'll move 1 more to the right. So now it should be the smiley face in the corner. Which one has the smiley face in the corner, C or D? D, okay? So we could just eliminate C and put D, all right? We didn't have to focus on the shaded bit, okay? The shaded bit wasn't that important. There could be a reason for it, but the easiest way to find the answer was to look at those rotations and the movement of those shapes. Question 34. Okay, 34. You should be able to recognize there's some color changes going on, okay? And also, just a reminder, if you've forgotten, scans, right? Keep that in your head, scans. So, let's focus on one of these aspects of scans, okay? Which one looks pretty significant, important? Well, the black color, okay? So the color is what we're going to look at. So, the color is the only thing that's really changing, okay? And maybe this square's position. So, let's look at the color. This black color over here, where does it end up going? It ends up becoming the first quadrant, okay? The first part of the sector, for a circle, okay? Then the stripe pattern becomes this first part of the circle. And this white one becomes the first part of the circle. So for our next part of the next circle, it's going to be this curly, like stripy curly one, okay? The stripy curly one is going to come right there. So it should be in this part. So which one has a stripy curly in the top right? Here, these two. Okay, they have stripy curly in the top right. So that means A and C are possible answers, and B and D are wrong. Now let's look at one more color, okay? Because we can just focus on color. Because why? Because here, there's the difference between these two, even though you can use the square to help you see the difference, you can also look at the colors, okay? So here you can see this like dashed lines here, and there's white here, and the stripes here, and there's no stripes here. So we can just focus on color. We're trying to save time, right? We don't want to try and make our brain think too much about different things. So let's just focus on color. So if we look at the color here, these things are just moving across one in the clockwise direction, okay? So let's look at here. This dash one moves clockwise and ends up here. And this black one, okay, this black one moves one clockwise and ends up here. So in the next shape, it should move, the black one should move and end up in the top left. It should be in the top left, the black one right here, okay? So which one has that? Both A and C have it. So maybe let's look at a different one. Let's look at the white part of the circle, okay? So the white part right now is over here. So it should move one down. So it should end up becoming right over here, okay? So which one has the white part in the bottom right? C does, okay, not A. So C is our answer, okay? 35, okay. Let's look at it in a bit more detail. It looks kind of simple, right? Because there's not much going on here except the rotation, because you can see clearly these rats or mice are moving in some rotational way, okay? Do the colors change? Not really, okay? The colors don't really change. So the colors, okay, they stay in the same position. They don't move around. So that shows that the only thing happening here is the rotation, all right? So the rotation is what's occurring. So let's focus on that. So here we have the top left mouse. It moves and rotates 90 degrees anti-clockwise, okay? Anti-clockwise, 90 degrees, okay? Cool. But what else also rotates? This bottom one also rotates, okay? Now, when we look at the other ones, okay, let's look at the other ones, all right? We're going to look right here. We see when it moves from this position to this position, okay, we see these two rotate, okay? These two only rotate, okay? Can you see the difference? How it starts off facing this way, but then ends up looking there. How this one faces down and starts looking to the right, okay? So what's happening is these things are rotating in pairs. And I can show it to you one more time. Let's look at this pair here. This pair is going to be the only ones that rotate. All right, just look very carefully. Over here, do these rotate? No, they don't. They stay the same. But these two, the ones highlighted in blue, okay? They rotate 90 degrees anti-clockwise, okay? So they rotate in pairs, okay? So for the first pair that rotates, okay, is going to be the one here. Then it becomes this pair. Then it becomes this pair. And then it becomes this pair. So this pair is going to rotate now. Okay, the one I'm just highlighting in the red laser pointer. Okay, this is the pair that's going to rotate. They're going to rotate 90 degrees anti-clockwise. So let's draw this out. Where would this one end up looking? We end up looking in this direction. Okay. And what about this shaded one? It should end up looking in the same direction as well. Okay. So we should have one white and one shaded rat looking up in the top row. Okay, which one has that answer? Well, A and B both have that. So C and D are wrong immediately. Eliminate your answers. Now we need to compare the bottom. Okay, the bottom should be the same as the previous one. Okay, so I'll do it in purple. The bottom here should be the same as the previous one. Okay, is this the same with this? No. So therefore B is wrong. And A is our answer. All right. So sometimes they might try to make it seem complicated, but actually it's really simple. It's just the rotation, and maybe they rotate it in different ways. Maybe they won't just rotate one by one. They could rotate it in pairs, okay, or triples. So we have to be careful when we looking at these. All right. And that's our abstract reasoning walkthrough complete.